Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have done it. We have made it past the end of the regular season. The playoffs are about to begin. We have several teams still alive, and so we will do what we always do. We will recap last week. We will talk about the teams who had their seasons come to an end, and then we will preview the playoff matchups. For this week, we have a handful of games on Thursday. We have a couple games on Friday. Jam-packed as always in the first round. And we'll see who advances based on those games. We will do what we always do. We will work our way from the top to the bottom because that's the way we do it here on the podcast. And we will start with the Sherman Bearcats, who had their season come to an end, albeit on a positive note, with a 44-7 win over Frisco Liberty. So Sherman finishes its season at 3-7 overall and 2-6 in District 6-5A Division 1. That was good for 7th in those standings and 3 games out of a playoff spot. 5-3 got you in, and Frisco Heritage and Centennial also finished right above Sherman. In this final game, Caleb Orr, 15 of 20 passing for 252 yards and 4 touchdowns. 2 of those went to Randy Nelson, who had 4 catches for 126 yards. 2 of those went to Micah Hunt, who had 3 catches for 37 yards. Colby Ray Short in between had 3 catches for 39 yards. Jacavian Hughes, 9 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown. Jackie Johnson added a touchdown on the ground as well. And Sherman did what they needed to do against a winless Liberty team, or at the time an 0-9 about to go winless Liberty team. Held them to negative passing yards, -2. Only gave up 10 first downs, forced a couple of turnovers. And this game, after the first quarter, was never really in doubt. Sherman kind of tacked on as the game went on, pulled away. And Liberty's only touchdown came in the final couple minutes to avoid the shutout for them. And so obviously a little bit of a roller coaster ride in Josh Allman's first season back at his alma mater. From a record standpoint, it's a minor step back after 2 straight 4-6 seasons to go 3-7. If Sherman had held on to that lead they had against Frisco Centennial, we'd be talking about essentially the same setup as last year. 4-6 overall, 3-5 in district play. It's going to be interesting to see what realignment does with Sherman. They turned in a number, 2,251 students. That is going to be close to the cutoff for 6A. A lot of the early projections have Sherman staying in 5A. We won't know that for about another month or so. When the cutoffs come out, we'll know for sure. And then Sherman can either, breathe a sigh of relief or have to deal with going up into the biggest classification. This district is probably going to be torn apart by realignment. Obviously, like I said, with the potential for Sherman to be moving up. Frisco Liberty is going to be moving down. There's a chance Frisco Lone Star moves down just based on some of the preliminary projections and numbers that are out there. People are still gathering numbers to figure out all that sort of stuff out. But this is a tough district, obviously, for Sherman being the only non-Frisco school involved. That doesn't help them in a lot of areas. And, Lone Star is one of the top 10 teams in the state. Frisco Reedy was ranked before they lost to Lone Star on the last play of their game. They both went 9-1. Wakeland goes 8-2, and their only losses are to Lone Star and Reedy. So you have 3 of maybe the top 15 teams, in 5A Division 1 in your district. And so everybody's sort of fighting for that last playoff spot. And Sherman had its moments. You can look at a lot of their games and say, if They played really well for 3 quarters against Centennial. The fourth quarter is obviously where they lost that one. They played well in the first half against Frisco, who got the 4th seed. And they played, that game was a close game, going into halftime, but then Sherman didn't score again, and Frisco was able to pull away. That just here and there you can see the makings and the pieces, and unfortunately it just didn't click. A certain time, I would talk with Coach Allman obviously on a weekly basis, and 1 week you'd say, man, you scored enough points to win that game, but the defense didn't help you out. And then 1 week the defense would be really good, and say, man, if we just could have avoided the turnovers or put together a couple drives, we would have had a chance there. But that's football. That's sports. That's life. It's how it goes. But there is a huge chunk of juniors that are coming back, for one final season. And you don't want to put it all on where Sherman goes in the realignment, but that's obviously going to be a big factor. But you have a quarterback coming back in Caleb Orr. You have weapons at receiver. You talk about the 2 guys in this game who had big games in Nelson and Hunt. Colby Ray Short's back. Kane Bowen, who spent a good chunk of time on offense at running back, who ended up as Sherman's leading rusher, is also a really good linebacker. Like I said, there are pieces there. When you look at across the lineup and you see junior, a couple sophomores mixed in as well, they're gonna have to find almost an entire new offensive line, just based on a lot of those guys are gone. A lot of guys that there's not going to be a lot of experienced guys coming back. There'll be a few, but not enough to make a full line. So that's obviously going to be a concern. But you look at their skill position guys and you say we can work with that. We can go through a full off season. We can go through a full spring and be ready for when the season rolls around, regardless of what class we end up in. So obviously that's the big thing for Sherman is getting into the off season stuff, getting into the spring stuff, seeing what happens in realignment, and being able to make that leap. Everybody talks about when you have a new coaches and everything, you want to see that leap from year 1 to year 2. We'll have to see what the opponents look like. But I would like to think that there's some good pieces there to where we can see Sherman be in the mix for a playoff spot. I don't think they're that far away. But again, it's going to depend on who they're going to be grouped with. So that's where Sherman sits going into the off season. Moving down to 5A Division II, where we have Denison, who is in the playoffs. They clinched last week, like many expected that they would, just because they were playing a winless team as well, and something would have to go horribly wrong for Denison to at least not win. There could have been maybe something crazy in terms of seeding, but as long as they won, they were going to get into the playoffs, and they did that with the 47-16 win against Mesquite Poteet. A game that was not really close, like we expected. 14-3 after the first quarter, 30-10 at halftime, and Denison's able to continue to add to that in the second half, and doing it again, as an injured bunch, dealing with guys out of the lineup, guys trying to come back into the lineup, but again, they find a way to get it done. Jalen Butler, 13 carries, 117 yards, and a touchdown. With 2 touchdowns, and that was his third straight 100-yard game since he's been moved into the lineup because of those injuries. Michael Kennedy, 8 catches for 99 yards and a touchdown. Grant Yerke scored a touchdown on the ground. Ty Rhodes, 10 of 14 passing for 119 yards and the touchdown. Also had an interception. Gavin Robertson returned a blocked punt, 10 yards for a touchdown. Matt Rangel kicked a couple field goals. As Adrian Douglas capped off the the fun with his lone carry of 41 yards in the final couple minutes to put the cherry on the top of this one. And again, what you're supposed to do against a winless opponent. Poteet has 27 carries for 34 yards, and at one point early in the fourth quarter, they had negative yardage rushing. Their last drive of the night was able to pick up some yards that made the game look a little bit better than it actually was. And again, Denison did what they needed to do. They go into the playoffs on a 3-game winning streak. They had to win all 3 of those games. If they would have lost any of them, they would have missed out on the playoffs. So give them credit for doing what they weren't able to do last year, essentially in beating Crandall, because they won these other 2 games last year. They knew what they had to do. We talked about it all season. When you're in the second year of that realignment cycle, you know which games you have to flip to get in or to stay in, depending on what you did the year before. They knew they had to beat Crandall. They did, and then they knew they couldn't lose to a winless Poteet team, and they didn't. So they're 6-4 overall, and they're going to be playing Marshall in a 5A Division II Region II bi-district contest that is at 7 o'clock on Friday. It's at Marshall. I know some people have been asking what that's all about. Why aren't they playing at a neutral site? Why is Denison driving all the way to Marshall? And it's because in the first round, 6A and 5A, the top 2 teams in the districts get to host the third and the fourth place teams. Marshall, despite being 5-5, is the district runner-up in 5A Division II, and so that's why they get to host. If it had been flipped, they would have had to come all the way up here, but unfortunately it's not. So Marshall is an interesting little story in itself because they won 30-28 against White House in their final district game, and that was a must-win for them because the way things worked in that district, by winning they got the second seed, and they won on a touchdown, a quarterback keeper with a couple seconds left. They were trailing, and they ended up taking the lead on that touchdown, and then and they make the playoffs and get the second seed. If they had lost that game, if they had been stopped on that play and lost, they wouldn't have made the playoffs, because the way the standings would have worked out is they would have tied Mount Pleasant for 4th and lost the tiebreaker. So it literally came down to the final play of the season for Marshall just to get in. And so they're going to host. Just looking at it, my initial reactions are this is a pretty even matchup. You can say that just by the records, but you look at the teams that they've played. We've talked about with Denison. 3 of their 4 losses are to Frisco Reedy, Lovejoy, and Melissa, who are 3 of the best teams in the state. Marshall, among their 5 losses, is a loss to Texas High, who was a ranked team before they lost their last game, but that was their only loss. The 9-1 Texas High team. Longview, who's a ranked Division I team, and Carthage, who's the defending 4A Division II champions. So both teams have 3 losses where you look at and say, I mean, just about anybody that would have played those 6 teams is probably going to lose. So I think they've done what they're supposed to do against the other teams on their schedule. I think they're somewhat similar in terms of the offenses. That they more rely on their running attacks than they do the passing game. And so I think it's a pretty even matchup. I think obviously the 2 things that you have to look at is, one, Denison's going to be on a bus for a really long time driving out there. How do they handle that? And you're on the road. It is not a neutral site, so it's going to be probably pretty packed in terms of the fan base. Obviously, Marshall's they've had success in the past. It's been a while since they've had a really good run. I think 2018 they made the region semifinals. So but they get to host. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be excited the way they won last week, and the fact that they got in and got the second seed and get this home game. And you have a Denison team again after missing last year. How do they handle it? trying to win a playoff game for the first time since 2009. I think it's going to be a really fun and a really good game. Unfortunately, the last couple times Denison's been in the playoffs, it's been as a low seed, as the 4th seed, taking on a district champ, and unfortunately some of these districts that Denison's been matched up with, you're playing, you would have played Texas High, who had a really good record. The last time, a couple years ago when they were in the playoffs, they had to go down to Ennis. Ennis is always a powerhouse. So it's not easy when you're the 4 seed. It's a little easier when you're the 3 seed, and especially in this case, you're not taking on a team that went 9-1 or 8-2, and has that behind them. But again, if you're Marshall and you're coming off that win, you feel like you can pretty much beat anybody, and it's at your place. So it's going to be an interesting matchup with Denison going to Marshall. The winner of this, for those, and we'll do this for all the playoff matchups. The winner of this is going to play the Midlothian Heritage Dallas Wilson winner in the area round. It's basically 100% lock that the winner is going to play Midlothian Heritage, who is undefeated and is ranked very highly. They should advance easily off Dallas Wilson. So if you want to plan ahead and think about where that game might be, that's the opponent you're looking at, because they're undefeated, and it would be a huge upset if Midlothian Heritage does not win their first round game next week. So, but at that point, I think both these teams would say, we'll just be happy to win a first round game, get to the second round. We'll take our chances against anybody, based on the recent couple seasons that they've had. So again, I think it's going to be a really fun game. The only other time they met was in 2009, which many people know was the last time that Denison made their really great run to the state semifinals. Denison won that game 35-26 in the region semifinals. It was a game that Denison was down 19-7 in the second quarter. They were down 19-14 late in the third quarter. It was a very physical, tough afternoon game that did not look like it looked like that was going to be the end of the line for that group, and they found a way, and they were able to win again the next week. But that was outside. I mean, they destroyed people that season. A lot of those games were not close at all, and this was like the first time you were really like, oh, they're going up against a team that is almost on their level. But that group was just so resilient. They found a way to get the job done. And I'm sure, like I said, I don't want to say it, it's ironic, or there's some symmetry to the fact that that's the last time, that's the last year Denison won a playoff game, and it just so happens to be that they're playing each other this year. So we'll see what happens when Denison goes to Marshall. Going to be a long ride out there, and a long night getting back, but that's what the playoffs are all about, at least in the first round. With Denison going to Marshall, that's at 7 o'clock on Friday night. In 4A, we get to just talk about a playoff game because the Van Alstyne Panthers advanced. They did not play last week because they had the district bye. So Van Alstyne is 6-3, and they have a 5A Division II Region II bi-district game at 7 o'clock on Friday at Kimbrough Stadium in Murphy. That's Plano Stadium, but the address is Murphy. If you put it in your phone to try to find where to go, and they're going to be playing Wills Point, who is 5-5. Wills Point's coming off a 50-21 loss against Caddo Mills to end their district play, and like I said, Van Alstyne's had 2 weeks off. They have been very good in the first round since moving up to 4A. They won last year after dealing with the bye. Like I said, in this new realignment cycle, they got stuck with they drew the short straw, and they had to play They had to have the bye the last week of the regular season. The only problem, unfortunately, is that Carthage is looming as the defending champ, and even though Van Alstyne put up 30-something points on Carthage last year, Carthage scored, I think it was 65, and honestly, I think the Van Alstyne gave them one of the toughest, one of their tougher games in the playoffs. But unfortunately, that's the bracket. You can only do what you can do. Will's Point, I'll point out, this is just a big deal for them. They hadn't been in the playoffs since 2019. The last 3 seasons, they had only had 2 wins. So they've really jumped up. This was the matchup last year. Van Alstyne played Quinlan Ford in the first round. So this is obviously a different opponent. They've never played, and again, I think Van Alstyne's in a good spot. They've made the second round the last 2 years. Their defense we've talked about since district play started. They've held 6 straight opponents to 17 points or less. I don't think, just looking at Will's Point, they're not like I said, they're 5-5. They're not really an explosive bunch to where you go, I worry about trying to stop them. And obviously you look at some of the people that Van Alstyne's had success against, namely Aubrey, being able to hold them to 17 points. I think this is a game where Van Alstyne can ride that defense, at least to the second round. They've got a lot of different weapons. It hasn't been what we've seen the last couple of years where they rely on just 1 or 2 kind of guys. You look at every week and it's kind of been a different guy who has a big game or has some big moments. And I think that's going to continue with Van Alstyne. I wouldn't be surprised to see them win when they take on Will's Point in their 4A Division II Region 2 bi-district game at 7 o'clock on Friday at Kimbrough Stadium. Again, that's in Murphy, but it's the home of one of the Plano schools. It just is what it is. And I guess the only thing to worry about with Van Alstyne, if there is a worry, is just the rust factor. But they handled it well last year, so I think they're in a good spot to be playing into next week. Down at the 3A level is where we have a lot of our teams, which is no surprise because that's where we have a lot of our 3A and 2A is where we have a lot of those teams in the same districts. We talk about the first with the Whitesboro Bearcats. Last week we talked about they had to win to get in. They probably needed to win by a significant margin just based off of tiebreaker stuff. You didn't want to have it be a bad situation. But if they won, that took care of it. If they lost, they had to limit that the damage as much as possible. And they were down 8-0 after the first quarter, and you go, oh no. But you got to play 4 quarters, and the final 3, Whitesboro dominated in a 47-14 win against Ponder. And so that gave Whitesboro the 3rd seed as they finished 5-5 overall and 4-2 in district play. And again, much like some of these other districts, the top 2 spots in the standings are held by 2 of the top 10 teams in the state. Brock winning it with a perfect record and Paradise losing only to Brock. The only thing that is kind of different from the last couple of years is Whitesboro was in that 2 spot and Paradise was in that 3 spot. And like we said, they met in the region semifinals, so there's a chance that could happen again. But for Whitesboro to do that, they're going to have to get past Jim Ned in the 3A Division I Region 1 bi-district matchup, which is 7 p.m. on Friday at Burleson. Jim Ned is 8-2, and they're coming off a 14-7 win against Iowa Park. This was actually a first-round playoff game a couple years ago, 2018. Jim Ned won that one 30-21. Obviously, it's a different group, but really impressed with what Whitesboro did against Ponder. Max Parker leading the way on both sides of the ball. He had 12 carries for 192 yards and a touchdown, and he also returned 2 interceptions for scores. Carter Sluter, 8 carries for 39 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 3 catches for 58 yards and a TD from Clay Hermes, who was 9 of 14 passing for 81 yards in the score. And this was one of those games going in like I thought. I didn't really know what to expect. You had 2 teams that knew they had to win. Ponder losing, they got left out of the playoffs. Peaster got the last spot on the tiebreaker. Peaster passed them but Peaster was going to clinch no matter what because it had the tiebreaker over Ponder. So Ponder goes from tie for third place to fifth place, finishing a game back of Peaster. And so Ponder came in, probably all fired up, knowing they needed to win, probably thinking they had a good chance, and they literally, they score middle of the first quarter, and then they don't score until after the latter half of the fourth quarter, and Whitesboro's able to build up a really big lead in between that. Obviously, I think that's a really good sign for Whitesboro. It's one of those situations where I don't know how. I don't want to say how much of an upset it would be if Whitesboro beats Jim Ned. I know you look at the records and records do mean something. When you talk about a team that's 8-2, when you talk about a team that's 5-5. But again, we talk about when you look at somebody's schedule and you say two of those wins are against the number 4 and number 9 team in the state, and then you throw in they lost to a very good Pottsboro team. They lost to a very good Bells team. And so you've got four games there four scores there that are against really good competition. And so I don't know where Jim Ned fits in that. And so I like the fact that Whitesboro's coming in off a really solid victory that they had to have. And they you put up 47 points, you hold somebody to 14 in a must-win for both teams. I think that's a really good sign. We know this is a group of seniors. There's more than a handful of them that are 3-year starters or whatever that were part of these last two deep runs to the state quarterfinals each of the last 2 years. The only thing that is concerning is if you look at the losses, they lose because they're giving up points. Teams are scoring in the 40s, high 30s against them. But again, I think there's a good feeling going into this one. The winner plays the Bushland Brownfield winner. So if you don't want to travel, make sure you get out to watch this game this week because it may be the closest one. Until we get that Paradise matchup in the third round, if it does happen, just because it is in Region 1. So, again, we've got this game. It's 7 o'clock on Friday, Whitesboro against Jim Ned, and it's at Burleson. And we'll see if Whitesboro can ride the momentum of winning a must-win and then taking that into the playoffs with their game against Jim Ned to open the playoffs in 3A Division 1 Region 1. And then the other big school 3A team is also in action. Pottsboro is going to take on Jefferson in a Class 3A Division 1 Region 2 by-district game. That is at 7 p.m. on Thursday at Paris. And this is a game that will be interesting to see for Pottsboro because they are coming off a 45-38 loss against Mount Vernon. So they are 8-2. Jefferson comes in at 7-2. They're coming off a big win, 56-21 against Gladewater Sabine. So we talked about Pottsboro last week. They had to win to get the 2 seed. The winner was going to get the 2 seed. The loser was going to get the 3 seed. And unfortunately, Mount Vernon had a big second quarter to take a 28-21 lead. Then they scored to open the third quarter to extend that, and unfortunately, Pottsboro was playing catch up, couldn't get there, and unfortunately they come up short to finish third in the standings. Major McBride, 21 carries for 251 yards and 4 touchdowns. He also had 3 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown. Caden Humphrey was 13 of 25 passing for 166 yards with the touchdown and an interception, and he also ran 11 times for 67 yards. So obviously, if there's a concern, you look at in the two losses, Pottsboro's given up a ton of yards. In this one, they gave up, almost 550. They're built to compete in the shootout. I wouldn't want to do it every week. But obviously, you look at the two teams that beat them in Winsboro and Mount Vernon. They were able to not only match Pottsboro score for score, because Pottsboro scored, points in every game basically. They haven't had a really down game, in terms of offense, but obviously the defense was an issue in this one. I'm super intrigued in this one. This is a game that I'm covering on Thursday night. Obviously Jefferson, they both have very good records. I will say this about Pottsboro. They have not lost in the first round since 2018. I have a feeling this could be a shootout. The winner plays the Grandview Fairfield winner. I'm leaning obviously that it would probably be Grandview. Pottsboro is no stranger, unfortunately, to playing Grandview in the playoffs these last couple of years. And I just hope that, and I'm sure the Pottsboro fans and the coaches and the kids, I hope that they're able to bounce back, from a loss that you go in thinking, we have to win. It's a super big game. It was at home. We didn't get the job done. Can we bounce back from that? And did you get a worse matchup that cost you from maybe making a run, going, a couple rounds, if not further, because you have, I haven't looked at everybody, but you can't tell me that there's not a better, if there's not a better back, there's backs that are probably just as good. When you talk about the season that Major McBride is having, 224 carries, 2,207. These are the actual numbers. 2,275 yards, 41 touchdowns on the ground, in 10 games. I mean, you're basically saying this running back, this offensive force is averaging 228 yards and 4 touchdowns a game. That you can just bank on that. His worst couple games were games that he didn't have a lot of carries because the game was so out of hand they took him out. You could basically clock in 200 yards and a handful of touchdowns every game. So I have a feel. Like I said, I feel like this could be a shootout, back and forth. Maybe it's one of those who has the ball last, who has the who makes the one critical mistake that allows somebody to go from up 7 to up 14, and then that's the difference, in the second half or something like that. Somebody does an onside kick when gets an onside kick recovery when somebody's not expecting it. I don't know. I'm just my sense and just what I've seen and research and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards with this matchup. So again, that's 7:00 on Thursday at Paris. Pottsboro against Jefferson in a Class 3A Division I Region 2 bi-district game to knock out the big 3A schools that advance to the postseason. We have a couple of the Division II schools in 3A that advanced, and they are no strangers to making the playoffs and having success in the playoffs. And we will start, of course, with the defending 3A Division II champion, Gunner Tigers. They have a 3A Division II Region 2 bi-district matchup against Trinity Leadership Cedar Hill. And this game is at 7:30 on Thursday at Eagle Mustang Stadium in Richardson. And so I will tell you, starting off, that Gunner is 10-0. They have won 25 games in a row because they had an undefeated championship season last year. And they ended district play last Thursday in a game. Last Thursday in a game that was not close, as none of their district games have been. They won 54-0 against Blue Ridge. Trinity Leadership Cedar Hill comes into this matchup 3-6. And they actually won their last game 32-21 against Blooming Grove to be the 4th seed out of, I guess that's District 7, 3A Division 2. But Gunner beats Blue Ridge. It's 34-0 after the first quarter. They cruise like they normally do. And they spread the ball around. They dominate on defense. I guess that's the best place to start. They hold Blue Ridge to 4 first downs, not even 100 yards of total offense. Walker Overman, 4 carries for 74 yards and a couple touchdown runs. He is 6 of 7 passing for 138 yards and 3 touchdowns. One of those to Colson Wood, one of those to Cannon Lemberg, and one of those to Jace Martin. Lemberg ends up going 3 catches for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns because he also caught one from Preston Tarpley. Tarpley ended up going 6 of 9 passing for 102 yards with 2 touchdowns. He threw one to Dylan Tokars. His lone catch was a 39-yard TD. Wood ended up with 2 catches for 37 yards. And again, it was Jake Rathbone had a touchdown run. And just the typical, you look and you see, whatever that is, 8 touchdowns. Is that 8 touchdowns, team? 4, 6? 8 touchdowns, and it's 6 different guys scored touchdowns. They spread it around. That's what they do. They win big. They outscored their district opponents. They went 5-0 in district, and they outscored them 338-6. They have shut out their last 4 opponents, and there's a good chance they shut out this opponent too, because when I said Trinity Leadership Cedar Hill, especially for Gunner people, that may have triggered a callback to last year, and I would say yes. You opened last season with a 67-6 win against Trinity Leadership. And then you were supposed to play them in this round of the playoffs last year, and they decided to forfeit. And then you were supposed to play them on your schedule early this season, but after the forfeit and getting beat 67-6, they said, nah, we're good. We don't need to play again this year. And they canceled. Now, of course, when I saw that this was going to happen, this matchup was going to happen again, the first thing I did when I checked with Coach Fizell was, are you sure they're going to play? And so we're taping this, and he assured me they're going to play, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. Just because they've been so flaky, and if you're willing to forfeit a playoff game one year, why wouldn't you be willing to forfeit it the next year against a team that's shown that they might be better than the playoff team that went and won the whole thing last year. But supposedly they're going to play, and I hope they do. I feel like maybe they learned that was a terrible decision, and they shouldn't have done it last year. But again, this is more about Gunner starting a playoff defense. The winner of this plays the Millsap City View winner in the area round, just to throw that out there. I think the prevailing wisdom that everybody has talked about since last year's championship game, with a lot of the pieces that were coming back, is we're looking at Gunner Canadian again in the semifinals. There's no reason to think that Gunner is not going to win this region. The best challengers are probably Bells, who Gunner beat 64-6, and Holiday, who Gunner has beaten every year during this run, most of the time in the region final, and those scores have not been close. So Gunner is obviously, everyone is projecting Gunner to win this region, and everybody is projecting Canadian to win the other region. And I know it's a month away, but it's out there because the collision course seems like it's going to be there. Gunner has not repeated. It's the only thing they really basically have not done since 2016 as they chase title number 4. They've gotten back to the title game after winning a championship. They've never been able to defend the title. And I think until that happens, obviously that's the motivation for this group. They want to be able to say that they're the ones that were able to go back to back. And I don't think they're going to be challenged very much until they get to the state semifinals, and then all bets are off. Because Canadian probably thinks they're just as good as they have ever been as well. But you got to get there first, and I think that is among the biggest things is don't have any injuries and don't look too far ahead that somebody could bite you. But Gunner has just killed everybody. I mean, their closest game was 35-12 against Brock. And you're living right if your closest game is a 3-touchdown lead against a bigger a school that's that's a bigger school. They haven't allowed they've only allowed more than 2 touchdowns once. That was the Walnut Grove game, so that was against a 5A team. You look at literally, like I said, you look at their last 6 games. They've allowed 2 touchdowns in the last 6 games, and they've been dominating everybody, and so that's what I think people are going to expect when you talk about Gunner and how far can they go. And I know a lot of people are probably picking them to repeat. A lot of people are picking them at least to get to the semifinals against Canadian. But the first step comes against Trinity Leadership Cedar Hill. Again, 7:30 on Thursday at Eagle Mustang Stadium in Richardson in the 3A Division II Region 2 by-district matchup to open the playoffs. There's a couple of 3A Division II teams that are not in the playoffs. We'll touch on them because they had their seasons end last week. S&S finished off District 6 3A Division II play with a 54-0 loss against City View. Hunter Corville had 6 catches for 32 yards. Landon Lewis, 11 carries for 29 yards. But S&S has 3 touchdowns, unable to stop a team that, wanted to get as good a seed as it possibly could from that district in City View, and we've talked about it all season with the Rams. They end up going 0-10, and ultimately it comes down to they were not able to score, barely averaging a touchdown per game. In district play, that number essentially got worse. Shut out by City View, shut out by Holiday, shut out by Callisburg. They scored 9 points against Henrietta, and their best effort was 21 points against Valley View. But then you look back again. We talked about non-district. You lose. You only score 3 points in a loss against Howe. You lose a game 7-6. Your defense plays really well against White Wright, but you end up losing that game 7-6. Just the offensive struggles on that side of the ball were a big part of the problem of trying to be competitive against some of these teams. It's going to be interesting with them, and I'll probably say this about every team that doesn't make the playoffs because it's a realignment year. They may not be with this group in the future. It's going to depend on some things. Maybe they come back to the East. I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make. But this may just be sort of a 2-year deal where they end up with these schools. And again, Holiday's always really good. Like I said, they've been to the region final a ton when they have to face Gunner. Henrietta has had a really good season. It just, like I said, I think just there were, again, there's moments when you look at teams and you say, man, if we would have just played a little bit better here. They had a chance to win their opener against Bonham. They lost that by a possession. They held some people to some relatively decent scores. Like I said, the White Wright game, that's a missed extra point from at least going to overtime. And so there were some positive notes there. If they can just be a little more consistent offensively, I think obviously that takes pressure off the defense and maybe could lead to some things. But again, we'll see what realignment does with them. And then the other team that didn't make it in the playoffs at this level is the Howe Bulldogs. They finished 3-7 with a 69-21 loss against Lone Oak, which was a game Lone Oak had to win to have a chance to potentially make the playoffs. They still got left out, but Howe finishes 0-5 in district play, a step back from last year when they dropped down from Division I to Division II. They made the playoffs last year, but unfortunately injuries were just too much to overcome for them. Starting in the opener, when you lose your quarterback and you think he's going to be out for a little while, and then he ends up having some health issues to where he misses the whole season, and now you're talking about moving this guy from this spot and this guy from that spot. It was just sort of a domino effect. On a weekly basis, guys were banged up, guys would miss a game or two and then come back, and they just again they just could not have the same consistency that you would have hoped for, and I think that really took a toll on them, particularly on defense. They were giving up a ton of points, and I think sort of kind of with they were better offensively than SNS, but it kind of goes hand in hand with if your offense cannot stay on the field, sustain some things, it makes the life difficult for your defense. And when your depth is an issue because you have guys injured, that certainly doesn't help. So, again, the question with Howe is going to be how healthy are they going to be, which you won't know until it happens. Realignment for them, it looks like they're going to stay down again, which would be huge. The problem is they're close enough to Gunner that if Gunner goes up, Howe's going up because Howe's a little ahead of Gunner. I think the number is going to move up. The number last time was 360, and Gunner turned in 363, and I think Howe's number was like 364.4 or 0.5 or whatever it was. So if somebody's going to make it, they're both going to make it. And then that becomes the question of what does that district look like. So I think if they stay down, though, again, this is a very competitive district after Gunner and Bells. Those are the top two teams. They've been the top two teams during these cycles where they're all together. And then, you had a three-way tie for third place. Leonard, Blue Ridge, and Lone Oak were in the three-way tie this time. They all went 2-3. They all kind of beat up on each other. And so the question is, can Howe just win a game or two and be in that mix going forward? That's obviously going to be the key. Like I said, everybody below Gunner and Bells thinks they have a chance, and there's no reason if this district stays together that Howe shouldn't think that they're in this mix again, just because it's been a very even district after those top two spots. So I'm going into realignment assuming that they're going to stay down, and if they don't, obviously that's going to make life harder for them just because they'll again be one of the smaller fish in that bigger pond to try to be able to compete at that level. So those are the 3A teams that we have talked about. We have a couple 2A teams that we need to talk about. We'll talk about them first because they're not playing next week. The first one that we'll talk about is the White Red Tigers. They had their season come to an end last week with their loss to Tioga, 51-0. This was again. I feel like I say this as a broken record of, White Red's issue the whole season was they had trouble scoring. So they finished at 2-8 and 0-5 in district play. They had a chance to make the playoffs. In hindsight, looking at it, because Tom Bean ended up, again being ineligible. If the Trenton White Red game essentially decided the last playoff spot, and that was a game that was a 41-31 game, not last week but the week before that, or 2 weeks before that, and that was essentially White Red's best effort in terms of in this district, from an offensive standpoint, again, we talked about, can you compete with people? It's crazy when you look back and look at it because, you have co-district champs. Nakona only had one loss. And right off the chute, right out the, early in district play, you see, we saw that score of Nakona only beat White-Wright 7-6. And you're like, well, they can compete. Nakona hadn't lost a game. White-Wright's able to compete with them, But you look at in this district, they played 5 district games, and White-Wright scores 6 points, 7 points, 0 points, and where's the fourth one? I can't find it. And 8 points. So in 4 of the 5 games, you scored 8 points or less. And then, like I said, the one game that you had a chance, 41-31. And again, this goes back to non-district 2. We kind of saw this coming of the defense has been playing really well. But again, you beat it. You one of your wins is a 7-6 win. They got shut out against Honeygrove. They only scored 14 points against Blue Ridge. So like I said, it was a struggle for the most part for White-Wright, and it didn't end on a good note. They had made the playoffs the last couple of years. They just couldn't get past the first round. But you had a new coach in Blake Yancey, totally changing things up, trying to find the pieces that fit here and there, and I think obviously you would have liked to have seen them just continue that trend of being in the playoffs. And again, this is one of those situations where depending on how things work out realignment wise, is this a district that's going to change a lot, a little, not at all? And if it stays the same or relatively the same, you have to throw Tom Bean in the mix of they're a playoff contender now. And so it's going to be a little bit harder after these last 2 years, knowing that they weren't a factor no matter where they finished. They're going to be a factor. And we'll talk about them next since we've kind of led into that with the Highway 11 rivals. So Tom Bean ends their season. They go and shut out Trenton 27-0. Bobby Rogers has another big game, 24 carries for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns. Is 10 of 25 passing for 180 yards. Braylon Barrett has a 37-yard touchdown pass to Brody Pearson. And Barrett also finishes 6 catches for 126 yards. Defensively, shut them down. Held them under 90 yards. Finish in a tie for third place at 6-4 overall, 3-2 in this district. And if the playoffs were to happen, Tom Bean would have been the 3 seed over Alvord. Alvord would have been the 4th seed. And you finish a game out of tying for first place, the 2 teams that you lost to, Nakona and Tioga. And again, we talked about that Nakona Tom Bean game. Tom Bean, gave them all they wanted and had a chance to beat them. So we could have been talking about a potential district champion who couldn't go to the playoffs. That is officially behind them. We don't have to talk about. We'll talk about it in the season preview because it will be important about just saying how they now are eligible. But I said at the beginning of this district schedule, Tom Bean was going to be a spoiler. They wanted to show everybody, hey, if it wasn't for these this punishment, we would be a playoff team, and they would have been a playoff team regardless. They made the leap from year 1 under Steve Fex to year 2, huge jump, better offensive. They did exactly what you're supposed to do: better offensively, better defensively. Go from 2 wins to 6 wins. Tom Bean has a winning record for the first time since 2008. They had made the playoffs in there, but it was with a losing record. So they legit had they finished with a winning record, first time since 2008. It's their best district performance since 2016. And a lot of these guys are back. They had a handful of seniors, and I legit mean like 4 guys, 5 guys, who were contributors. But you have a lot of these guys are going to be back. And again, we can talk about what district they go in, whatever. No matter where they go, they have shown they're going to be competitive. They're going to be in the mix. Maybe not even for a playoff spot, but for a district title. That's what this group has shown, and give them a lot of credit for playing as well as they did. It can be really hard when you have nothing to play for, and it doesn't matter if you go 5-0. Your season ended. Your season ended yesterday anyway, or last week. So that can be hard to deal with. So I could totally understand if those kids would have just kind of been like, and they opened district, Tioga beat them up pretty good in the district opener. Whatever that was like 38-6 or something like that, 33-6. I mean, they could have been like, okay, well, here we go. Doesn't really matter. And like I said, they win 3 of the next 4, and they lose to the co-district champion by 5 points. So they easily could have won, for the 3 of the last 4, or 4 of the last 5, I guess. 4 of the last 5. So Tommy definitely a team to watch out for next year. The playoff restrictions will be off them, and they'll be able to qualify, and I would expect them, even if this district stays the same, they're going to be in the mix for sure. The one team in our area that did make the playoffs was from this district was Tioga. The Bulldogs have a Class 2A Division 1 Region 2 bi-district contest against Hamilton, 7 p.m. on Thursday at Brock. Tioga comes in at 7-3. They won obviously they won last week. What we said, 51-0 against Whitewright. Hamilton comes in at 6-4. Hamilton won 36-13 against Goldthwaite to end their regular season. So Tioga won, and Alfred beat Nakona, which, I mean, I guess it maybe shouldn't be that surprising because, like I said, Tom Bean almost beat him. Whitewright almost beat him. They had a lot of close calls, and they just couldn't survive this last one, and Alfred beat them 28-20, which was nice for Tioga because they get to share a district championship. They both finished at 4-1. So Tioga can say we're back-to-back district champs, even though they had to share it with Nakona this year. Unfortunately, though, that means because of the head-to-head, and that's Tioga's only loss in district play, they get the 2nd seed. And even getting the 2nd seed meant a first-round rematch from last year. Tioga was the champion last year. Hamilton was the 4 seed. Tioga's the 2 this year. Hamilton's the 3, and they play again. Hamilton won last year 41-15. It ended up being the best season for Hamilton in almost 20 years. It was their best season since 2005. They got to after they beat Tioga, they won the next round and continued on. I totally skipped over Bells, didn't I? I totally did. I totally skipped over Bells. Okay, well, I'm just gonna finish up with Tioga and say the biggest thing about this is you have a new coach, you have new offense. The question is, how do they handle facing a team that they played last year who beat them pretty handily, was very surprising. It was a 4 beating a 1. That it does happen, but it is kind of surprising when it happens. And you have this new offense that's air raid, pass all the time, all that sort of stuff. That's what they did last week in the win over Whitewright. Hayden Hilliard, 19 of 25 passing, 473 yards, and 7 touchdowns. They're pretty good about spreading it around that way as well. Austin Norwood, 4 catches for 141 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jake David's lone catch was a 99-yard touchdown pass, the last scoring in this game. Johnny Dorpinghouse, 2 catches for 57 yards, and also added a touchdown run. Jonah Grubbs, 3 catches for 34 yards and a touchdown catch. Gage Anderson, 3 catches for 31 yards, a touchdown. I mean, you look at the balance of this is you have 2 through 4, you have five guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 guys had at least 30 yards receiving. They do a really good job of spreading it around. They got up big. They forced 3 turnovers. And were able to get the shutout against Whitewright. It's good. This to me, this feels like a toss up. You have a 7-3 team versus a 6-4 team. I don't know if you want to give the slight advantage to Hamilton because they can come in with that experience from last year. They're not intimidated, but again, you have a different coaching staff, a different offensive philosophy, and so don't be. I could see Tioga doing what they've done. I talked about also within the last couple of weeks of you could see that Tioga has gotten better on offense as the season has gone, which is what you would expect when you have a new coach, a new staff, new schemes, new philosophies, a new quarterback who hadn't played because of injuries the last couple of years, finally getting a chance to step in. You played some tough teams early on that it was going to take a while for them to iron everything out, and they've kind of been rolling for the most part, except for that one loss to Nakona. It's really gone well for Tioga the latter half of this season, and so if they were to keep that going, it would not shock me at all in their 2A Division I Region 2 by district matchup, 7 p.m. Thursday at Brock. I'm gonna double back, talk about Bells. I totally scrolled down on my sheet and missed talking about them, which is not smart by me because I know a lot of Bells people like to listen. I think Coach West is one of them, so I apologize to all the Panther fans that wanted to hear about a 49-28 victory over Leonard to end district play, and we talked about how that was a key game for them because that was essentially to decide second and third place, and Bells is able to do that. We've talked about the tiers in this district. Gunner beats everybody, and Bells has really dominated everybody except for Gunner, and so second place has sort of been, you pencil in Gunner for the district championship till somebody beats them. You pencil in Bells for second place in this district until somebody beats them. And I think it is whatever the crazy stat is. I didn't look it up, but it's something like the last 4 years for sure. I think it's the last 4 years. Nobody has beaten Bells in district play except for Gunner. And again, they do it in typical Bells fashion, running for 466 yards on 50 carries. That's 9.3 a pop. They threw one pass. Easton Brandon threw one pass. It went 15 yards. It was a touchdown to Easton Helgren, who led the way in rushing 16 carries for 231 yards and 3 touchdowns. Hayden Allen, 18 carries for 163 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bryson Thompson chipped in 7 carries for 28 yards and a touchdown as well. And it was a typical Bells game, put up in the 40s. Obviously Leonard, I think they thought they would. It was going to be interesting to see with Leonard because they had to bounce back from getting blasted by Gunner. I didn't know if there was going to be a situation at quarterback because Leonard's quarterback did not play the second half against Gunner. You didn't know if that was injury or if it was the game was out of hand, so let's not play him. And he was in street clothes, so you never know if it was maybe a combination of both. But this was a game too where Leonard didn't really get going until late in this game. It was 21-0 at halftime, and Leonard scored a pair of touchdowns in the final 2 quarters. And like I said, it's 42-21. Middle of the fourth quarter. Before Bells gets a couple touchdowns, Leonard gets a couple touchdowns to make it a 2-point game, and then Leonard scores again, and so they weren't really threatened in this one. So they go in as the 2 seed. So their 3A Division II Region 2 bi-district game is against Corsicana Mildred. This is going to be at 7 p.m. on Thursday at Royce City. Bells comes in at 8-1, and Corsicana Mildred comes in at 6-3. They won their last game 55-0 against Rice in their district. And again, we talk about teams making good runs, deep runs. Bells is trying to make the region semifinals. I guess it would be for the third straight season and the fourth time in 5 years. I think that's right, or something like that. That sounds right. And again, their bugaboo is their side of the bracket. They run into Holiday. I think, again, much like people would say, oh, we expect Gunner to play Holiday in the region final, there are people who say, well, we're expecting Bells to play Holiday in the region semifinal. And you're facing a team, at least to start off, Corsicana Mildred. They're in the playoffs for the first time since 2017. They're obviously having a good year at 6-3. If they do somehow win this game, coming in as the underdog, it would be their most wins in a season since 2012. So they're having a really good year for them. The winner of this game plays the Jacksboro Callisburg winner. I would selfishly be rooting for Callisburg, although I think Jacksboro's 10-0. But I'm secretly, of course, or not secretly because I'm telling you on a podcast, I'm rooting for Callisburg for a couple reasons. One, it'd be a fun rematch from non-district play. Gunner Bells won that one before opening district play against Gunner. They won that one 49-22, and because it means the midway point is going to be somewhere around here, perhaps in Grayson County, maybe at Whitesboro, maybe at Sherman or Denison, as opposed to somewhere to the west if it is Jacksboro. But I believe Jacksboro is undefeated. The last time that I had checked, when I was looking at the top 10 rankings for the final week of the season, I think Jacksboro snuck in. Yeah, they're 10-0. So would take a good effort by Eddie Gill and the boys over in Callisburg to knock off Jacksboro. But selfishly, I would love to see that, because that would mean a more local game in the second round next week. But again, Bells goes in as the favorite. They've obviously had early success these early couple rounds. Like I said, I think that's a lot of the expectation is their collision course with Holiday is on track. For a couple weeks from now. I think that looks like that's a pretty I would say a pretty safe bet, because you'll probably have to go through Jacksboro, but that's what's at stake in this first round matchup between Bells and Corsicana Mildred. Again, that's 7 p.m. on Thursday at Royce City to open that part of the bracket. Two more teams to talk about in the 2A Division 2 Region 2 bracket. The bi-district game between Collinsville and Archer City. That's going to be 7 p.m. on Thursday at Bridgeport. Collinsville comes in at 9-1 after they won 61-7 against Chico, and Archer City is 5-4 after they won 55-8 in their district finale against Monday. So again, we talk about Collinsville getting to this point. They're 9-1. They have done exactly what they did last year. Their only loss is to Cooper. They went undefeated in district play with that win over Chico. Back-to-back undefeated district runs in for them. That's never been done in their history. It's the first time in program history. They're averaging a shade under 50 points a game, and they do what they do. You say 61-7, typical Collinsville game in terms of Logan Jenkins going 23 of 26 for 477 yards and 7 touchdowns. The last of those was his 50th of the season and the 120th of his career. There's a lot of career milestones Every week from here on out for him and for these majority of these pass catchers, it could be their last one. Now they made it all the way to the region final last year, lost to the eventual champion in Albany. But every game that they play, he's going to be moving up, top 10-ish in, potentially passing yards for a career, completions for a career, touchdown passes for a career. He's in the top 15, top 10 range right now, not just for 2A, for the entire state. He's in that mix. Another big game for him in this one. The main target in this one, Carter Scott, 4 catches for 179 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rylan Newman, 7 catches for 91 yards. Colin Barnes, 3 catches for 75 yards and a score. Parker Wells, 4 catches for 61 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cash Morgan had a 42-yard touchdown catch as well. Reed Patterson had a 61-yard touchdown run. Again, we talked with Collinsville, if their running game can do some things, they can do some major damage. In this one, they had over 600 yards of offense. And, again, they took care of business against a Chico team that was in last place, and got there, had a late touchdown to avoid the shutout in this one as well. So that's how things look with Collinsville taking on an Archer City team at 5-4. Archer City's been pretty honestly decent in the playoffs. They've made the playoffs 6 years in a row. They've made the second round 5 of those times. I don't think this is gonna add to that ledger, but you never know. It is the playoffs after all. But again, you have a Collinsville group. So many of these guys are 3-year starters. They've had some success in basketball. They obviously, a lot of them were part of the state tournament team for baseball. I think they're obviously motivated. I think they think they're good enough, at the very least, to get back to the region final. I'm sure Albany's going to be waiting, unless something crazy happens there. But I think they know that they should get back to that point. Whether they can compete against the defending state champs, who they gave a pretty good run to in that game last year, I think that they should at least get to that point, and then all bets are off. The winner of this plays the Sterling City Miles winner, and I don't know anything about either of those teams, but it's going to be a Western game. So unfortunately, Region 2 and 2A has a lot of stuff to the west. So there may be some long trips again for Collinsville as they try to make another deep run in the 2A Division 2 Region 2 bracket after starting with Archer City, 7 p.m. Thursday at Bridgeport. And the last team to talk about, because we're down in the TAPS rankings, Texoma Christian didn't have the finish that they would have liked. Lost to Bethesda Christian 56-8. So Texoma Christian does not win a district game. They go 0-4. Finish their season at 3-6. But again, to go from not having a team at all last year, not playing any games because you didn't have the numbers, to come in and to get 3-6 is a good return. There was a chance, obviously. If you win a couple of these district games, you would have made the playoffs, and that would have been, another tremendous thing going forward. And a realignment for them is really going to make a difference in this. It's going to be basically a completely different district. So we'll see how they adjust. But I think just the fact that you're back playing, and you've set the bar for, okay, here's where we're at now. We need to be better. We need to find a way to win some district games, be competitive in these district games. Can we compete for a playoff spot in what's going to be a bigger district? So, but kudos to Texoma Christian to be able to come back and be competitive, win some games, and do what they were able to do. So that's a look back at the end of the regular season. That's a look at what we have coming up, first round of the playoffs. Not a lot of close games, a lot of driving for some people. So please be safe, whatever game you're going to. Whether you're a fan of that team or you're just going to watch some, obviously a lot of people in Grayson County might go watch some of these games. I don't think you're driving to Marshall like I will be, but some of these other games you might want to go check out, or just playoff games in general around the area that are somewhat close. So please be safe. I know the weather's kind of wacky this week. May get cold, may not be cold, so be prepared for that. Double check whatever day you're going to a game. Obviously, there are going to be some bigger schools playing maybe on Saturday for some playoff games. You may want to go check out those. So enjoy it because it's fun. It's really real now. The regular season's over. We're gonna see who can get to next week and beyond. Here on the All-Texomaland podcast. Again, follow me on Twitter at Jason Del or X at Jason De La Rosa. I'll have the updates from the games that I'm at. Always post the scores. Always posting the next week's matchups, so you know where and when and who and all that fun stuff. So follow me there. Follow us on our social media on Facebook at either Herald Democrat or All-Texomaland to read all about what's going on. And I appreciate the support here on the podcast. So again, with that, we will talk to you next time here on the All-Texomaland Sports Podcast.